Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about that Cotton Bowl game. Ohio State wins a dramatic game where Jack Sawyer makes the biggest play of the entire season, and excuse me, could be the play that they remember for quite some time as the play that got them a national title. But we'll obviously get into that in a couple of segments. But let's talk about where Texas goes from here. Obviously, a very, very tough loss. Definitely one that feels eerily similar to that one they had against Washington in 2023. But at the end of the day, back-to-back trips to the national semifinals is nothing to turn up your nose at, and definitely a lot of things going into this next year. Obviously, one of the biggest ones is what it looks like with that guy under center. What it looks like with Arch Manning as the guy under center for Texas as QB1. And it's definitely big shoes to fill. There's no doubt about that. Quinn Ewers, as much as he was maligned, as much questions as there were, and we might actually get into this in the next couple of days, talk about Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning and how it was a little bit unfair what Quinn Ewers was expected to do while at Texas, but at the end of the day, he is walking out the door. He is someone that has led them kind of back to the mountaintop of college football, and now it is Arch's turn to kind of take over around there. But he's not the only one they're losing by any means. They are going to lose at least 3 offensive linemen. Kelvin Banks, Hayden Connor have already declared, and Jake Majors will follow probably pretty soon here, maybe even today. And then Cam Williams is another name to watch. Definitely a guy that could come back, could possibly go. It sounds like they're pushing very hard to get him to come back, but a lot of different people have him in the first round, so a lot of different questions around that. Definitely something to watch. For defense, you're losing Jahdae Barron, you're losing Andrew Makuba, and then on the front end, you have Vernon Broughton, Alfred Collins walking out the door, David Benda from that linebacker room. That being said, the defense will be fine, if I'm being totally honest. Colin Simmons is one of the best pass rushers in the country in 2025. Anthony Hill, the same exact thing for linebackers. Ethan Burke, a couple of guys on the back end. They might be able to get Michael Taft back, and that's something we'll talk about here in a second. But overall, they have a lot of guys that are going to be ready to roll for that defense. Not a group that I'm super worried about going into 2025, but definitely some guys to replace on that back end, especially Jahdae Barron is a absolute beast and someone that had a ton to do with how good they were against the pass this year. But you move on to the Arch era, and you have a lot of different questions about what this guy is, how he's going to look when he finally gets the reins, and, why didn't he get the reins earlier? And that's been a question that a lot of people have had. I think the reality is there's a lot of nuances to that Texas offense. There's a lot of different things that you have to worry about, and there's a lot of different blitz pickups and different things that just have to happen. We saw Nico Iamaleava really struggle with that this year. Different things that it felt like he was, inches away from really clicking, from really hitting, and those little things definitely got in his way in a lot of different ways. So you move forward to Arch, and you feel definitely confident. There's no doubt about that. The ability is very, very obvious. It's downright insane in a lot of different ways. And now you move forward, and you just hope that he has that, mental ability that Quinn Ewers definitely had throughout his career. And can he step up to the plate in a big way right off the jump? And a big question is going to be the wide receiver room. How good does that look? How good does that look going forward? And you're probably going to lose Matthew Golden. Now the question is, can they hold on to him? It's definitely something that they're very much pushing for. If they're able to do that, a lot of the issues that they would have in that wide receiver room will likely be handled in a lot of different ways. You'll have Golden, you'll have DeAndre Moore, who played a big time role. You'll have Ryan Wingo coming back, so you'll have plenty of talent in that room, especially if you get Matthew Golden back. Now, if you don't, you'll probably be more than fine. Probably have to go into the portal to pick up a guy or two, but at the end of the day, they have plenty of talent in that room. I don't think that's going to be a huge issue, but you are losing Gunnar Helm, you are losing Isaiah Bond, you're possibly losing Matthew Golden and a couple other guys that played a big time part in this team, so definitely something that you're going to have to watch for, and they did a great job of replacing the wide receiver talent that left last year. This might be an even bigger task to do it this year. So a lot of different things to talk about, and definitely a room that we're going to watch very closely over the next month, and definitely in that spring portal window possibly. But for 2025, I think the biggest thing to watch is CJ Baxter in a lot of different ways. He obviously got hurt in August and didn't get to play the entirety of the season. He is their power back in a lot of different ways. He runs great between the tackles, and that was a big-time struggle for this team this year. So it's going to be a huge piece getting back onto that team. It's going to be a guy that you're going to see pretty much as the running back one. Now, Jaden Blue did declare for the draft yesterday, so it's going to be him, Trey Wisner, and a couple other guys. Jarrett Gibson is someone that we'll talk about in time, but but definitely is someone to watch there. But overall, CJ Baxter is a huge player for this team. If he was on this team, I think he possibly could have gotten a couple more wins. Those red zone issues wouldn't have been quite as bad. Still would have been an issue most likely, but not quite as bad. And definitely, he would have been the back in there for that goal line stand. He would have been the guy that was running it right down the center of that defense. I can almost promise you that. So overall, definitely a guy you're going to want to get back. Definitely a guy that if you get him back and utilize him correctly, this team could be downright impossible to stop offensively, especially in that run game with Arch Manning's legs. But this team is going to be talented. That is never going to be an issue for Steve Sarkisian in Texas. That is never going to be something that they have to worry about. Now, you do have things to worry about. There's no doubt about that. Is Arch Manning going to be the guy that we fully expect? Is he going to be ready to roll in year one? Because the reality is you're going to have to make the CFP, and that might not even be enough for people to look at Arch Manning the way that he probably should be looked at if you were able to pull that off. But it's going to be, in some ways, insufferable to hear people talk about Arch Manning over the next little bit because I think he's got to be perfect. Let's be totally honest. You have that last name. You have all the pedigree coming out of high school. You're playing at a program that wants to compete for national titles. You are going to be judged in a different light than a lot of different kids out there. Now, he seems to be more than capable of handling it, has a very good head on his shoulders, obviously has a ton of ability in the world, but the reality is there's a lot of different questions about what he can do in terms of leadership. There's a lot of different questions of can he understand the nuances of this offense, and can he just be the guy that everyone's expecting him to be, which is essentially perfect in a lot of different ways. So overall, I think there's a lot of different questions, and one of the bigger ones is all the players moving on. You obviously have Quinn Ewers, you have Kelvin Banks, and maybe 2, 3, 4 other offensive linemen, a lot of different guys that could be walking out that door, and definitely something you're going to have to worry about. And then obviously Jahdae Barron, a guy that on the back end of that defense that gave them structure, that gave them meaning, and then Alfred Collins, Vernon Broughton, maybe Michael Taft, maybe Matthew Golden. So a couple other guys to watch there. It's going to be a huge NFL draft for Texas, and definitely one where I don't know if they're going to break the record that UGA said. It might come down to a couple of those players that might come back or go, but it's going to be a lot of players that end up in the NFL draft for this team, and then you're going to have to rebuild the same way you did last year. They had 11 guys drafted last year, handled that business relatively well, but this is going to be another challenge, and definitely one that Steve Sarkisian has built up a program that seems to be ready for it, but a lot of different questions as you head into 2025, and one of the biggest ones for me is, are they just all in for 2025? There's been a lot of talk around the Texas insiders that this could be the way they go about business, kind of the Ohio State model from this year, try to get guys back that possibly could go to the NFL draft like Cam Williams, like Michael Taft, like Matthew Golden, and if you're able to get those guys back in the fray, you're going to have an incredible year. There's almost no doubt about that. That offensive line is still going to be downright incredible with Cam Williams and DJ Campbell and Trevor Goosby, who's played such great football for them throughout the back half of the season. But overall, this is definitely going to be a big-time question, likely one that will be answered throughout this week. Does Matthew Golden end up going to the draft? I tend to lean yes, but definitely sounds like there's a lot of push from Texas people to get him to come back. Cam Williams, the exact same. Michael Taft, I expect to come back, actually, but definitely going to be a lot of things to watch. And if they go all in, if they say that 2025 is the year, you can see the confidence that they have in Arch Manning. And then replacing O-line starters is going to be a huge question this offseason. Will it be 3? Will it be 4? Is is Cam Williams going to come into the mix? Is DJ Campbell possibly going to jump into the draft? I don't expect that to happen, but definitely something that a lot of people are watching right now. They could replace all 5 offensive linemen. I don't expect them to. I expect them to replace 4, maybe 3, depending on what Cam Williams does. But overall, that's going to be a huge question. They've done a great job building up that offensive line room, but still something definitely to watch. They've had a couple of different transfers in, and definitely some guys that they're going to want to lock down just to make that a little bit easier. They get Cam Williams back, though, I think they'll be more than fine at that position in a lot of different ways. And then, are the wide receiver replacements ready? This was a question last year, and it was definitely one where if they didn't get Isaiah Bond and Matthew Golden, they probably wouldn't have been ready in a lot of different ways. But you got to get some guys. There's no doubt about that. But you still have Khalil Lockett, Jamie French coming in from the class that you're bringing in. I believe they got on campus yesterday, actually. And a couple of different guys. Aaron Butler's another one to watch in a lot of different ways. And a couple of guys that are going to bounce around. And make some big-time plays for you, and they're going to have to be ready pretty much right away. If they're not ready to roll, if DeAndre Moore doesn't take that next step, it's going to be a team that's going to leave a little bit on the table in 2025. So going to be interesting to watch what those wide receivers look like throughout spring. Who do they bring in? How many guys do they bring in? And when can they bring them in? Can they bring them in before spring, or do they have to wait for that spring portal cycle? Probably will have to wait for that spring portal cycle, but moving forward to 2025, some players to watch. I mean, Arch Manning's a duh. He's got to be the guy in a lot of different ways. He's got to be the leader of this team. He's got to be the guy that everyone looks to, and it might be a little bit unfair at times, no doubt about that. But at the end of the day, that's what you get when your name is Manning, and that's what you get when you're the starting quarterback at Texas. So a lot of different stuff on his shoulders, and we'll hear a lot throughout spring about this kid. And then C.J. Baxter, he was the guy that would have gotten the ball in a lot of different points for Texas in the red zone throughout this year. He's going to be back in 2025 and will be a huge player for them. Will definitely be the running back one. The question is, how great is he? How ready is he to go? And how does that ACL feel after a little bit of a tear this year? And then Alex January is another guy you're going to want to watch. He is someone that we've seen the last 2 years. Texas has dudes at defensive tackle pretty much every single year. I think this is going to be the guy in 2025. Definitely a breakout star for me, and we'll obviously follow him and a lot of other guys around Texas throughout the offseason, but I really like Alex January, and I think he's going to make a huge amount of plays for Texas in 2025. And then you look forward to 2025, and yes, that first game is up in Columbus against that team that they just lost to. It is going to be insane. There's no doubt about that. You're going to have Arch Manning against maybe Julian Sain, maybe a couple other guys, depending on how that spring goes. But overall, going to be an incredible game, going to throw Arch Manning right into the mix right away. And it's going to be a lot of eyes on him, and if he doesn't win that game, it's going to be a lot of people saying a lot of things. But the reality is, overall, a relatively manageable schedule. You play a lot of the teams that, like you played this year, bottom half of the SEC in a lot of different ways. A&M I expect to be a little bit better. Georgia I expect to be a little bit better. I expect Florida to be a whole lot better. So there's different moments where they definitely could get tripped up here. But overall, very manageable schedule. Absolutely one where you look at this and say they should be a CFP team. There's almost no doubt about that. Definitely something that he's going to have to deal with, Arch Manning, and a lot of different things that they're going to have to deal with. But overall, you look at what 2025 is going to be. A lot of optimism. There's no doubt about that. A lot of people are going to be putting this team as the number one team in the country going into 2025. A lot of people are going to be saying that they're the national title winners. A lot of people are going to be saying that if Arch Manning doesn't win a title or doesn't win a Heisman, he is a downright disappointment. A lot of different conversation around this team going into 2025. Now, I do have a question if 2025 or 2026 is the year that they really get everything to click and everything really falls into place. But at the end of the day, you do have a lot of really talented guys. There are definitely some aspects that you have to get a little bit better, like that wide receiver room, like that O-line room, like a couple of different areas around this team. But they're going to be plenty talented. They're going to have the guy at quarterback that everyone's going to be watching. They're going to have just ridiculous talent on the outside in a lot of different ways, and they should have that running back room in a little bit better of a position than it was this year. They're going to be one of those teams that you're going to see on probably number one in a lot of different way too early top 25 rankings. I'll probably do mine next week, so be on the lookout for that. But overall, it's going to be a lot of different questions. There's no doubt about that. They're going to have to make sure that wide receiver room is ready. Got to make sure that O-line room is a little bit better than it is right now, and a lot of different questions for this team. But you got the guy that's going to lead the way. It is going to be Arch Manning going into 2025, and it's going to be a lot of different questions around that kid and a lot of different critics around that kid as he goes into his start of his college career. But going to be an interesting year in 2025. Probably going to be one of the most followed, one of the most interesting teams in 2025 is going to be Texas because of that number 16. Obviously going to be a very, very talked about, very much maligned guy in a lot of different ways, but going to be a guy that has everything on his shoulders. But we'll talk about that. We have plenty of time, obviously, to get into Arch Manning throughout the offseason, but let's get into an early look into the national title game. Ohio State against Notre Dame, going to be an incredible game down there in Atlanta, and we'll break it all down right after this, so stick with us.